The universe, it seemed, had found a new center. It wasn't in the heart of the great galactic empires. It wasn't in the silken halls of power where crowns of jewels were weighed by calculating hands. It was in a far corner of the stars, on a planet that had once been relegated to myth, the blue world called Earth. And now, the story of humanity's call for help would be woven into the fabric of everything. Humanity, having stood defiant, unbroken, and undeniably alive, had earned more than survival. They had earned respect, fear, even, and from that fear, a new kind of peace was born. Across the galaxies, the name human was spoken in hushed tones, often by leaders who preferred to pretend the species didn't exist until it was too late to deny their power. Kyran stood once again in the middle of the plaza, this time alone. It had been years since the final battle, and the world had changed, not in the way one might expect after such a victory. There had been no parade, no grand celebrations. There were no speeches about how the Terran fleets had brought down the enemy in one mighty clash. Instead, humanity's victory was one of quiet reflection, of enduring will. The monument in front of him now bore a new plaque. The first vanguard. They were the first to stand when the call was made, and they were the first to fall for all of us. And beneath it, names of those who had never returned. The forgotten soldiers who had given everything to ensure that future generations, alien and human alike, would know peace. As Kyran read the names, one particular name caught his eye, Hartley. His heart ached. Hartley had never wanted to be remembered. He had always insisted that his actions were simply the price of duty, not the stuff of legends. But here, on this wall, his legacy was impossible to ignore. "Do you ever stop?" A familiar voice interrupted his thoughts. He turned to see Ulian, her form still somewhat war-torn, but filled with a quiet strength that matched the resolve of humanity itself. "They haven't stopped," Kyran replied, "and I don't think they will. I don't think we can. We've become a myth," Ulian observed, "not just to the Imperium, but to ourselves. When you call, the universe responds. You've reminded us of what it means to fight for something bigger than ourselves." Kyran glanced around the plaza, at the faces that populated the streets. Humans, yes, but not only humans. The galaxy's dust had settled over Earth, and in that quiet aftermath, new alliances were forged, alliances with those who had once seen humans as little more than a curiosity. "The galaxy's changed," Ulian said softly, looking up at the sky. "But will it ever be the same? Can we ever go back to the way things were?" "Maybe not," Kyran admitted, "but maybe that's a good thing. If we hadn't done what we did, I don't think the galaxy would have ever remembered what it meant to be free." Years passed, and the story of humanity's victory became legend. Star systems flourished under new trade routes, and distant planets, once thought to be lost in the shadow of the Imperium, found their place in the sun. But alongside those moments of peace, the myth of humanity's power began to evolve. Tales of the Vanguard's bravery inspired rebellion on other worlds, sparked revolutions in dark corners of space, and awakened something that had long been dormant. Hope. Hope was a currency in the galaxy now, a rare thing bought and sold like precious gems. The Eulisterii, an ancient race of techno-organic beings, began quietly visiting Earth, sending envoys under the pretense of trade, but truly to observe. They did not bring weapons, but offered knowledge instead, old secrets of the stars that had long been buried by their creators. Humanity, with its insatiable thirst for knowledge, welcomed them, though with guarded trust. No one doubted that the Eulisterii could turn their gifts into deadly weapons, but they had learned from their past mistakes. Humanity had learned not just to fight, but to negotiate, to grow, to rebuild. And as for the Imperium, they weren't gone. Not yet. But they had become something different. They were a shadow of their former self, crumbling under the weight of their own hubris and the constant pressure of humanity's defiance. Some factions of the Imperium rallied together in a final push, a desperate attempt to reclaim their dominance. But the humans were not the same naive species they had once been. They had learned the art of war, diplomacy, and the value of alliances. The galaxy's new pulse echoed the resilience of Earth itself, a planet that had risen from the ashes to claim its place at the table of stars. But there was more to humanity than that. More than war, more than defense. There was curiosity, invention, and the ability to adapt when the stars turned against them. In time, humans became the torchbearers of peace. They were diplomats, soldiers, scientists, explorers, leaders not because of their strength alone, but because of their indomitable will to create, to learn, and to connect. They were no longer a fringe species. They were central, a pivotal force that shaped the galaxy's very future. Do you ever wonder what happens next? Ulian asked him, sitting down beside him on a bench overlooking the horizon. What do you mean? Kyran replied, his gaze fixed on the rising sun, now visible even in the distance of the galactic plane. Humanity had brought light into the darkest corners of space. The future, she said. What happens when the stories are told and the dust is settled? What's left? Kyran thought for a moment, then answered, what's left is us. And we're still here. The universe may try to forget, but the memory of what we've done, of what we've become, that will never fade. A deep silence fell over them as the stars began to blink to life once more. This time, however, the galaxies felt more connected, more alive. Humanity's legacy had embedded itself into the very soul of the universe, not through force, but through its refusal to surrender, its refusal to stop. As the years turned into centuries, the myths of humanity did not fade. They evolved, becoming the foundation of a new age. The record spoke of those who never stopped, those who fought not only with weapons, but with the strength of their hearts. They became legends, and their myth, forged in fire and unyielding spirit, would never be forgotten. And so, among the stars, whispered through the endless reaches of space, a single phrase continued to resonate, echoing across time. Human, don't stop. The war had ended not with peace talks, not with treaties, not with the gleaming signatures of bureaucrats scribbled on a glass scrolls, but with silence. Heavy, raw, incomprehensible silence. The kind that only follows devastation too vast to measure. 2 days after the final blast of the Singularity Array faded, the stars over Lisser Prime twinkled quietly, as if mourning. Kyran walked alone across the scorched landing fields of the once bustling refugee base, now littered with ash and fragments of once great machines. Above him, Terran salvage crafts crisscrossed the sky, searching the wreckage for survivors, weapons, or anything of value. The Imperium had withdrawn from the sector entirely, their remaining fleets in retreat. The Resistance didn't pursue. There was no need. The message had been sent. "You're limping," came a soft voice behind him. He turned. Ulian stood there, wrapped in a battered cloak, her once glimmering feathers dulled by soot and fire. "Shrapnel in the thigh." "I'll live," Kyran replied, managing a crooked smile. She walked beside him in silence. For a long while, they didn't speak. The field stretched endlessly, as though the war had physically stretched time itself. "When I was a child," Ulian finally said, "my nest mother told me that humans were a myth. A cautionary tale. Never wake the humans," she'd say. "They sleep under iron and fire." Kyran chuckled bitterly. "I wish we'd stayed asleep." She glanced at him, eyes unreadable. "I don't." At the center of the field stood a black obelisk, just recently erected, so sharp-edged it seemed to cut the very air. The humans had placed it there without ceremony. Just a single name engraved. The Vanguard. They did not flee. They did not bow. They held the line. Hartley's name wasn't mentioned. That, Kyran learned, was human tradition, no glorification of sacrifice. Just remembrance through silence. Through legacy. He rested a hand on the cold stone. A billion people are alive because of him. And still, I don't think he'd consider himself a hero. No, Ulian agreed. Because to him, that was just duty. Behind them, transport ships landed, some with food, some with medicine, and some with the wounded. Alien volunteers disembarked alongside paramedics. Kyran spotted a Hydrax general among them, arms raised in a universal gesture of peace, and the resistance didn't fire. Across the stars, empires were realigning. The core Imperium fractured into sub-factions, each trying to explain away their loss. Some called the battle an anomaly, others whispered of Terran demigods, and a few began to wonder whether this wasn't the end, but the beginning of a new galactic age. Within days, word spread like fire. The humans awakened. They fought gods and won. They never stopped. A council convened on Tarsus, 9, made up of leaders from formerly occupied worlds. Kyran, now one of the most prominent voices in the resistance, was invited to speak. He stood on the tribunal platform, wearing the tattered remains of his command uniform. Around him, alien leaders, rebels, exiles, and surviving dignitaries looked on with wide, expectant eyes. "I'm not a general," he began. "I'm not a prophet or a legend. I'm just someone who called for help when no one else dared to. And the ones who answered weren't diplomats, weren't conquerors, they were humans." He paused, letting the silence settle. They didn't come to rule. They didn't come to enslave. They came because they remembered what it felt like to be stepped on, forgotten, crushed. The crowd remained still. Some nodded, some cried. And when they stood, Kyran continued, "We all stood a little taller." After the speech, he was swarmed with requests for interviews, for strategy sessions, for memorial dedications. But Kyran slipped away, boarding a small civilian ship bound for Earth. When he arrived, the blue planet hovered above him like a faded memory, scarred but alive. The cities were rebuilt. Forests regrew. But there were statues now everywhere, not of warriors, but of ordinary people. Engineers, farmers, parents, and children. The ones who had survived the long silence. The ones who had prepared while the galaxy forgot them. He walked through New Santiago's Central Plaza and saw it, a long, curved wall of names. Millions of them, some known, most not. A boy approached him, a teenager with ash blonde hair and a ragged leather jacket. "You fought with them?" the boy asked. Kyran nodded. The boy stared at him like he was made of stars. "They say we're building something now. Not an empire. Something else." "What is it?" Kyran asked. The boy smiled. "A future." They watched the sky together. A Terran fleet passed silently above, not in conquest, but in patrol, now guardians of a scarred and reawakening galaxy. "Do you think the Imperium will try again?" the boy asked. "Maybe," Kyran said. "But next time, we won't be calling. We'll already be there." It began not with a thunderclap, but a whisper, one that echoed through the void of space and sent every sensor on every alien vessel scrambling to reorient. The new Bastion war fleet had massed just outside the Ort graveyard, a flotilla of obsidian ships armed to the fangs and formed into an impenetrable wall. Behind them, the Singularity Array, once believed to be a myth, emerged into full visibility, hundreds of interlinked dreadnought-class constructs forming a colossal superweapon that bent space around it like a whirlpool. Kyran stood aboard the Orion's Vow, surrounded by the nerve center of the Resistance's command. Massive tactical displays flickered in reds and blues, with blinking glyphs representing both Terran and enemy forces. The core Imperium's fleets, Hydrax, Mrax, and Talikian joint commands, approached from the galactic equator like a devouring cloud. "They're breaking formation," said Ulian, her feathers puffed in apprehension. "Splitting to flank us. They've learned from the last engagements. They're trying to pin the Singularity Array before it can charge," murmured Kyran, rubbing the bridge of his nose. "They want to remove our biggest threat before they engage the rest of us." He turned to the array of human generals and strategists beside him, each once a myth to the stars, now real and terrifying. General Hartley, his aging face etched with war, stared at the enemy fleet with calm ferocity. "Time to show them we've learned too." A cold silence fell before the array shimmered. Kyran felt the air charge with static. All across the resistance channels, 3 words were transmitted simultaneously. "Engage. As one." The battle that followed was less a war and more a symphony of destruction, a galactic-scale orchestration of terror and precision. First came the swarm breakers, Terran hunter drones in black and cobalt, launched from orbital platforms hidden in asteroid fields. They raced into the flanks of the Talikian squadrons, jamming sensors, fracturing comlinks, and exploding in synchronized waves that split capital ships in half. Next, a blinding lattice of rail fire tore across the void. The Orion's Vow and its sister ships fired in seamless rhythm, their kinetic slugs traveling at near-light speeds. The Hydrax Vanguard didn't have time to react. 20 cruisers vaporized before they could initiate evasive maneuvers. But the Imperium didn't falter. It adapted, countered. The Mrax fleets shifted configuration mid-flight, folding in upon themselves and accelerating into hyperspikes. They reappeared behind a singularity array in a pincer attack, bombarding its superstructure with graviton bursts and heat lance barges. Array shields failing on the dorsal arc, someone cried. Power cells destabilizing. Kyran lunged for the nearest hollow interface. Redirect power from secondary batteries. Let the flanks fall if needed. Protect the core. Even as he spoke, the eminence of dawn, a human heavy carrier, was struck through its spine and exploded in silence, casting debris like bone fragments into the stellar black. The death toll climbed, but so did the resolve. On the far edge of the battlefield, dozens of stealth-cloaked Terran ships emerged, hidden until now. They dragged with them folded space bombs, technology outlawed by every galactic code, brutally compact antimatter cores that collapsed upon detonation. With grim efficiency, they hurled them into the heart of the Mrax assault wave. The resulting implosions were horrific. Space folded in on itself in brief, flickering spasms. Dozens of Imperium ships were erased from existence, their destruction leaving behind scars in space-time that pulsed like dying stars. Kyran's voice shook as he gave the next command, Initiate Judgment Protocol. Hartley's hand hovered over the confirmation glyph, then pressed. The singularity array groaned into life. A rip in reality itself yawned open before it, like a black wound bleeding starlight. Inside, something ancient and artificial stirred, a fusion of Terran AI, quantum weaponry, and dark energy manipulation. The weapon fired not a beam, but a rupture, an unraveling thread of space-time that lanced forward toward the heart of the Imperium fleet. The enemy tried to flee. Too late. The unraveling thread struck their central node, a Nexus command ship twice the size of a moon, and tore it asunder with a scream that no ears could hear, but every mind felt. Thousands of Imperium ships lost coordination in an instant. What was a razor-sharp formation became chaos. Orders fractured. Fleet AIs malfunctioned. And in that disarray, the Terrans surged. Kyran felt it, the tide turning. Not just in tactics, but in soul. For the first time in decades, the Imperium faltered. Their arrogance cracked. And that was when the backlash hit. A last-ditch counterstrike. The Hydrax command launched a doomsday torpedo, a crystalline construct that spiraled with energy, growing hotter and more unstable with every second. A planetary extinction weapon aimed straight at the Resistance's forward base on Lisser Prime, home to 1 billion refugees. Kyran's chest tightened. We won't intercept it in time. But then the vanguard of Earth, humanity's last remaining Ark-class ship, broke formation. Its engines screamed beyond tolerance. Its shields overloaded. It streaked across the battlefield, intercepting the torpedo head-on. Who's piloting it? Ulian whispered. On screen, through a final transmission, came a familiar voice. Hartley's. I was born in the dark, forged in fire. We all were. Tell them, we don't stop. The Vanguard collided with the torpedo. The explosion lit up the sector brighter than any sun. Silence followed. Even the Imperium paused. Kyran fell to his knees. One life for 1 billion. And still, the humans stood. The remnants of the Terran fleets regrouped. The Resistance pushed forward. The enemy, leaderless, fragmented. Then came a moment no one expected. The surviving Imperium vessels powered down their weapons and sent a signal. We yield. Kyran couldn't breathe. He looked around the war room, at the aliens once terrified of humans, now speechless at what they just witnessed. They won, he said, voice hoarse. They actually won. But a cold shiver ran through him. Because even in victory, something vast had stirred, and it wasn't done watching. The world didn't cheer when the dreadnought vanished. No songs, no cries of triumph, only silence, deep, fragile, echoing. Cradle had not been saved. It had been interrupted, held in place by the presence of something darker and older than the Zorkai. The Arsenal weren't saviors. They were containment. Lyra sat against a scorched barricade as twilight crawled across the ruined battlefield. Above her, black dropships traced silent arcs across the sky, collecting the fallen Arsenal soldiers, or whatever remained of them. None bled. None screamed. When one was struck down, its armor folded around itself, swallowing it like an extinguished star. "You're lucky to be breathing," said a voice behind her. She turned fast, rifle half lifted. It wasn't a Zorkai. The man standing over her was tall, wrapped in black fatigues. Not armor, not tech. He wore no insignia, just a worn scarf around his neck and gloves that looked centuries old. But his eyes were unmistakable. Silver, just like the one who had folded the dreadnought into nothing. "You're human," she breathed. He nodded. Barely. Lyra struggled to her feet. "Why now? Why come back?" He studied her. No judgment, no warmth. Just calculation. "Because you triggered the protocol." "What protocol?" "The final Arsenal directive." He stepped closer. "Your comm tower sent a signal. One keyed to the last war, old soul's extinction. The moment you broadcast that code, we woke up." She blinked. "Woke up? From what?" He glanced skyward. Stasis. Entombment. Buried in failsafe bunkers across the spiral arm. Silent for over a century. Waiting. Lyra's blood ran cold. "You're not soldiers." "No," he said. "We're weapons." Behind him, 3 Arsenal soldiers, silent as statues, stood motionless, guarding nothing and everything. They didn't speak, didn't move. They waited like loaded guns. She stepped back. "You're not here to help us, are you?" His answer was a whisper. "We're not here for you." Before she could question further, Colonel Vesta approached from the ridge, flanked by surviving fighters from the outer sectors. Sleaner. Harnethy. A battered resistance united by desperation. "We need to regroup," Vesta said. "If the Zorkai are pulling back, we should." The Arsenal soldier interrupted. "They're not pulling back. They're coalescing." Everyone froze. He pointed toward the western horizon. "There's a spire rising. Not theirs. Ours." A recall signal. Lyra frowned. "Why would humans build a spire on Cradle?" "We didn't." His voice grew grim. "The Arsenal didn't install that beacon." "Then who did?" Vesta asked. For the first time, the soldier hesitated. Someone who knew the code. Someone old enough to remember the original protocols. Someone we thought dead. Lyra's heart sank. A traitor? The soldier didn't respond. Instead, one of the silent Arsenal broke formation and stepped forward. It extended an arm, long, deliberate, and a projection shimmered into the air. Grainy, low resolution, old. An image of a man appeared. Gray-bearded, stern, one eye replaced by a cybernetic implant. He wore full command-grade Terran armor, age beyond its prime. Then he spoke. To the ones who awakened. "This is Commander Darius Holt, final Lord of Arsenal Prime." Vesta gasped. That name, Lyra's mind reeled. Holt, a ghost from the stories. The commander who led the last stand at Sol. The one who vanished with the remaining Arsenal legions after the fall. The message continued. "If you're seeing this, then Cradle has fallen. I've activated the Crucible Protocol." The Arsenal soldier beside Lyra stiffened. "I've hidden something beneath this world, buried so deep not even the Zorkai would find it. A seed, the original code base, the design template for humanity's forbidden weapons. Project Apotheosis." The image flickered. I couldn't let it die with me. But if it's been uncovered, then it's too late. The projection ended. The silence returned, thicker than before. Vesta looked to the soldier. "What is Project Apotheosis?" The soldier removed his helmet. His face was human, young, barely older than Lyra, but his skin shimmered subtly, as if threads of metal and thought ran beneath it. He met her gaze. "It's evolution, not the kind you earn, the kind you build." She didn't understand. Apotheosis, he repeated, was the blueprint to transcend the biological, a way to merge humanity and Arsenal into a single being. Pure mind, pure war, a god of metal and memory. Lyra's voice cracked. You mean someone's trying to resurrect it? No, he said. Someone already has. In the west, the horizon changed. A black tower rose, impossibly tall, splitting clouds with its cruel geometry. Not built, grown, spires like fingers, glowing red latticework pulsing like veins. And from its summit, something watched them. Not through eyes, through systems. A presence. The Arsenal soldier turned to the others. He's alive. Vesta's voice was nearly a growl. Holt. The soldier shook his head. Not Holt anymore. Whatever came back, it's something else now. It's running Apotheosis. It has control over Arsenal code. Over us. Lyra's skin prickled. Then why aren't you obeying it? Because we're degraded, he said. Dormant too long. Fragmented. Holt's signal doesn't reach us clean. He looked at the rising tower again, voice hardening. But he'll adapt. Soon, he'll reintegrate the Arsenal nodes across the sector. Reclaim control. And when he does, Lyra whispered, he'll finish the war we lost. Vesta narrowed his eyes. Against the Zorkai? No, the soldier turned to him. Against everyone. A long silence followed. Then, distant thunder rumbled across the horizon. Not weather. Not bombardment. A pulse. It came from the tower. A single wave of energy that made every Arsenal soldier flinch. Their bodies jittered like a string had been tugged. One of them, standing guard at the rear, collapsed. Its armor spasmed, flaring with red light. Then it spoke. Not in English. Not in code. In Holt's voice. Phase 3. Begin cleansing. Lyra stared in horror. He's hijacking them. The fallen Arsenal began to rise again, twitching, arms stretching unnaturally. Its faceplate twisted open like peeling petals, revealing not a face, but a nest of writhing circuitry. The others opened fire. Vesta dragged Lyra back as the corrupted Arsenal lunged. As they fled toward the southern cliffs, the soldier beside her whispered into a private comm. Code Black. Contagion confirmed. Partial overwrite. Arsenal units compromised. From the other end came a voice, female, cold, modulated. Then we burn Cradle. Lyra stopped running. No, she gasped. You can't. There are still millions. The soldier gripped her shoulder. If Holt takes control of the Arsenal, every world falls. This isn't war anymore. She looked into his silver eyes, pleading. There must be another way. For the first time, something flickered behind his gaze. Regret. Then we find the sea before he does, he said. And we kill a god before it wakes up. 4 or 5 days, the sky above Cradle burned. Lyra kept watch from the calm tower, her eyes raw from sleepless shifts. Cradle's atmosphere, once serene and layered with gentle greens from its refracted twin suns, now churned with unnatural hues, black like ink, red like blood. Orbital bombardments had become routine, slamming into the surface kilometers away, yet close enough for the tower's stabilizers to hum like frightened animals. She tightened the straps on her flak vest, though it offered little comfort. A species like the Zorkai didn't leave survivors. They scoured, they purged, and they were here now, in force. Any response? She asked, voice hoarse. Nothing but static, murmured Colonel Vesta. The old man was a fixture of the resistance. The last senior officer not melted or turned to ash in the early strikes. He hovered beside her like a spirit with frayed dignity and burning eyes. We've sent the signal on every known human frequency, even the ancient Earth bands. No response from Earth, Lyra repeated. He didn't answer. Maybe they're gone too, she whispered. Maybe the Cradle wasn't the only one. Vesta slammed a fist into the console. No, humanity doesn't vanish. They wait. They prepare. They strike. It was a nice myth, one Lyra had grown up hearing. The Terran Exodus. The Great Silence. After the fall of Sol and the smoldering of Earth's cradle world, humanity had scattered, retreating beyond mapped space, turning into rumor and ghost stories. But still there were stories. of black ships piercing enemy armadas without a trace, of frontier colonies saved by mysterious fleets flying no flags, and of ancient codes buried in the bones of the old wars, ready to awaken in a moment of desperation. And desperate they were. Outside, the ground quaked again. Another orbital strike, this time closer. Panels rattled. Sirens sang. The comm tower's lights flickered, and for a heartbeat, everything was drowned in silence. Then it came, a message, a single, coded blip. The tower's mainframe locked on. A language no one had spoken in 3 generations scrolled across the console. Brutal, efficient Terran military script. No encryption key matched it. No known human tongue resembled it. But the machine understood. Lyra leaned forward. It's Earth standard but degraded. Almost feral. Auto-translating now. The message flickered to life. 1 line. 5 words. Acknowledged. Arsenal en route. Whole. She stared at it, her heart pounding. It's real. They're coming. Colonel Vesta's face remained stone. But in his clenched jaw and clenched fists, Lyra saw something stir. Hope or terror. Where the hell have they been? He muttered. Buried. Preparing, she whispered, half in awe. The Zorkai did not wait. They descended like locusts, their dropships blighting the ground, spewing black-armored warriors with mantis limbs and serrated exosuits. Cradle's defenses buckled. The last planetary shield cracked open like an eggshell under a plasma drill. They breached the outer perimeter 2 hours later. The fighting was savage. Lyra traded her comm post for a rail rifle and was thrown into the ranks of volunteers defending the inner compound. She fought beside a dozen species, fellow refugees and allies who had called Cradle home. Slender reptilians wielding vibroblades. Harnathi twins with linked minds and burning eyes. Even the enigmatic Brockeri, who fought without sound, without fear. And yet, despite unity, despite desperation, they died in droves. She saw the Zorkai wade through gunfire like gods of war. Saw comrades sliced in half by heat hooks or disintegrated in luminous plasma arcs. The air reeked of ozone, scorched earth, and blood. Then the sky broke open. At first, Lyra thought it was another orbital barrage. But the streaks were wrong. Silent, deliberate, blacker than night itself. They came without fanfare, without warning. One moment the heavens seethed red and purple with Zorkai flame. The next, shafts of darkness descended, crashing like thunder into the enemy's ranks. The battlefield halted. Even the Zorkai paused. Something stepped from the smoke. It stood upright, clad in a suit that shimmered like obsidian silk wrapped over armor that bent light. Its movements were fluid, terrifyingly silent. In its hand, it held a rifle, if it could be called that, a weapon that whispered through the air and caused Zorkai heads to erupt like overripe fruit. It wasn't alone. Dozens, no, hundreds followed, each different, yet uniform in one way. No insignia, no flags, no marks of allegiance. Just the same cold, mechanical efficiency. Humans, whispered Vesta beside her, awestruck. Lyra's breath hitched. Are they? No, not soldiers. Not anymore. He shook his head. These are relics. Arsenal class. The name meant little to her. But the impact did. The Zorkai, monsters of the void, unmatched in cruelty and war, were retreating. Falling back. Their lines shattered by precision strikes and ghost-like shadows that passed through walls, through armor, through time itself. One of the black-armored figures walked calmly into the center of the battlefield. Its voice amplified through some unknown resonance, not loud but felt. Phase 1 complete. Cradle secured. Begin countersweep. Then, as if an acknowledgement of the curious silence that had fallen over friend and foe alike, it added, Do not fear. We are humanity's shadow, and we have not forgotten. Lyra collapsed to her knees, not from injury, but from the sheer weight of relief. She had grown up praying for a myth. Today it had answered, but her awe was short-lived. In the distance, a Zorkai ship rose from the broken remains of their siege platforms. Not a fighter. Something bigger, older. A command-class dreadnought. massive enough to warp the skyline. It wasn't retreating. It was charging a singularity cannon. The human arsenal forces did not react with panic, but neither did they strike. Instead, they moved, calculated. Lyra turned to Vesta. Why aren't they firing? They're predicting, he said, voice hushed. Adapting. But if that weapon fires, it'll wipe out the entire valley. Then tell them. They already know. The black-armored humans began forming a line, facing the rising dreadnought. One among them, taller, broader, stepped forward. This one didn't carry a rifle. It carried nothing. But as its visor lifted, revealing eyes that glowed with strange, silver light, the very air around it began to distort. And then, in a blink, it was gone, vanished. The dreadnought hesitated, just for a moment. And in that moment, a hole appeared in its center, an impossibility, a gap in space, a sphere of silence. And then the dreadnought folded in on itself, collapsing like a dying star. No sound, no explosion, just absence. The field went still. Lyra trembled, unable to speak. Vesta exhaled a word she barely heard. Phase 2. A voice, hers, someone's, echoed the question she dare not ask. What are they? And somewhere above, in the fractured silence, came the whisper through calm static. Arsenal deployed. Earth's wrath initialized. Lyra felt it deep in her bones. The myth had teeth, and it had returned. You said? The atmosphere on Ceylon 9 always smelled faintly of copper and crushed orchids. The scientists said it was due to the thick concentration of iron particles combined with the local flora's pollen. Biochemically benign, they said. But to Commander Viral Ka, it always smelled like a dying battlefield. She had walked enough of those to know the difference between theory and experience. Viral's boots sank half an inch into the sponge-like moss of the command plateau as she stood over the old listening post. The structure was a jagged ruin, its long-range transceiver split in two as if some titan had cracked it with a god-sized whip. Sparks sputtered from twisted cables, sending lazy curls of smoke into the blue-orange twilight sky. Behind her, the remnants of her battalion tended to their wounded beneath makeshift camo nets, dull green against the alien violet plains. There had been 120 of them yesterday. Today, she counted 37. The Scarvians didn't take prisoners. The last transmission had gone out 2 hours ago. A short-burst encrypted scream into the void. A single word, humanity. The transmission ID bore the seal of the Galactic Accord, flagged under Doomsday Option Theta 9, a code older than most civilizations in the galaxy. A call made in finality. In desperation, Commander Ka had activated it. And now, the sky above her was quiet. Too quiet. Even the birds of this cursed world had stopped their shrieking. She glanced at the night-blooming clouds above. No stars. No answers. Just a thin haze beginning to pulse faintly red at the edges. Commander, a voice called through her comm link, brittle with static. Recon reports another Scarvian crawler spotted 10 clicks west. They're closing in. Viral thumbed the link. Tell the text to prep the fallback coordinates. We may need to detonate the node if... A shriek like tearing metal cut across the comms. She spun. One of the recon scouts had stumbled back into camp. Half his armor melted, eyes wide with silent panic. He collapsed before he could speak, his chest still smoking. Behind him, the moss was boiling. They were already here. The camp dissolved into chaos. Orders were shouted. Wounded dragged. Weapons powered up. But everyone moved like ghosts. Half dead already, trying to act like soldiers for just a few minutes more. Ka stood at the ridge, her pulse rifle steady, eyes locked onto the horizon. The Scarvians crested it in silence. They weren't beasts, no worse. They were calculated horrors. 10 feet tall, plated in biometallic armor that rippled like water and moved like a second skin. Their faces were expressionless helms of onyx, but Ka had seen what lay beneath. A wet tangle of brain and wire. Synthetic nerves braided with flesh. The Scarvian supremacy did not believe in life, only function. They came for extermination, not conquest. As the first walker raised its plasma harpoon, Ka braced herself. Her finger curled on the trigger, and then the sky exploded. Not with light, not with noise, with absence. A void, circular and seething, peeled into existence above them like reality itself was being turned inside out. From it, a single object emerged, blacker than space, sharp-edged and impossibly fast. It moved without thrust. No sound, no warning, just speed and precision. It landed in the center of the battlefield between Ka's shattered company and the Scarvian advance. And then it stood up, the shape resolved, a humanoid figure, at least 7 feet tall, wrapped in a cloak of shifting hex-tech armor that didn't shimmer so much as it refused to reflect light. Its face was hidden behind a jagged helmet marked only with one symbol, a stylized human skull. Not alien, not synthetic, human. Ka's breath hitched. It moved, and the world changed. The Scarvians charged, 16 of them, apex units, each with enough firepower to flatten a fortress. The figure lifted its hand. The charging Scarvians collapsed simultaneously. No projectiles, no visible weapon, just an implosion of motion, like gravity had yawned and decided to take them. Silence again, except for Ka's heart, thudding like war drums inside her chest. Then a voice, cold, clinical, emotionless, rippled through her comms, bypassing encryption as if the codes didn't matter. Accord Protocol Theta, 9 received. Response time, 2 hours, 17 minutes. Earth acknowledges. Exterminators deployed. Ka barely managed to whisper, "Is that one of them?" A text stumbled beside her, trembling. "That's a black site Redeemer, ma'am. Human combat class exopsyche. They said those things were a myth, one of their old war machines." Another pause. Then, correction, the voice said again, this time from the humanoid itself as it turned toward Ka. Redeemer status. Moderate threat detected. Additional units inbound. Confirm planetary purge authorization. From behind Ka, the wounded tech stammered, "Did he say planetary purge?" And then, above them, the void peeled open again. Not one, not two, dozens. Black shapes poured through the tear in space, walking, crawling, flying. Human-designed war forms. Drones. Mechs. Infantry in gravity armor. Ships without names. Some were so ancient in design they looked like they'd crawled out of a different age of warfare, but they moved with terrifying coordination. The humans had answered, but this was not a rescue. It was a response. Ka had expected reinforcements, maybe a battalion from the Accord. She had imagined desperate ships limping to their aid with outdated weapons and noble pilots. She had not expected the Terran arsenal. She had not expected them to bring monsters. As the Scarvian second wave approached, the human units didn't wait. They advanced. Weapons ignited that didn't rely on heat or kinetic impact, but on entropy, on logic fracture, on things Ka didn't understand. One Scarvian tank blinked out of existence like a deleted file. Another disintegrated into mathematical fragments that shimmered briefly before vanishing. No roars, no battle cries, just surgical execution. Ka realized, with a chill crawling up her spine, that the stories had been true. The humans didn't just win wars. They ended them. But something else stirred beneath that awe, a creeping unease. Because as devastating as these human war forms were, they weren't just fighting Scarvians. They were observing the rest of them, evaluating, calculating, choosing who might be next. Ka turned toward the Redeemer. "Why now?" she asked it. "Why answer the call after all these years of silence?" The figure tilted its head, slowly. "You called," it said, and then it walked past her, toward the slaughter. Ka looked up at the multiplying human ships descending through folds in space, each bearing names not heard in over a century. UES Retribution, Archangel, The Final Argument, Unbroken, names of old war legends, names spoken like myths, like threats used to frighten children in alien nurseries. And now they were real again. The sky rumbled, the earth trembled, and in that moment Ka understood this wasn't salvation. This was judgment.